Some of you guys that are my age are going to remember these spark plugs from the early to mid 90s. SplitFire was marketed and advertised heavily back then. They sponsored some NASCAR races and other sporting events. Well, anyway, when I was taking apart some stuff on the 66 Mustang the other day, that's what I pulled out, some SplitFire spark plugs. Now it's got me wondering, where did they go? So feel free to jump in this deep rabbit hole I'm about to go into, and let's learn more about that company and where they are today.
SplitFire won a United States patent. It's clearly different, but is it really better? Some of the toughest judges in the nation conducted trials and published their verdicts. 5 extra horsepower by merely installing these plugs. A 4.8% gain in mileage. Quicker in the quarter mile. There's nothing like a SplitFire. You'll get more power and more mileage, guaranteed. You'll get it all or your money back.
All right, guys, let's start at the beginning. So the way SplitFire spark plugs came about, they were designed by Dr. Maston Forkum Jr. in the early 70s while conducting experiments on making his lawnmower engine fire more efficiently. With the assistance of Dr. Robert Sears, chairman of the physics department at Austin Peay University, they demonstrated the superiority of the V-tip design. Since the split electrode provides more spark surface area, the SplitFire is able to fire multiple sparks in random pattern than a single spark. Dr. Forkum founded MHC Company and produced the plugs on a limited basis. The patent was acquired by Energy Performance and has patented the SplitFire name. So basically the claims they make are that the SplitFire provides a superior fire when used with computerized fuel-injected systems. In older cars, the plugs can significantly reduce emissions due to firepower. Horsepower is also reported to increase. As far as testing in racing engines, they've got articles by Paul Rossi, Firestone, Firehawk, Eagle Talons, Doug Rippey, Escort Series Corvettes. He says it produced 10 more foot-pounds of torque, which is 6.1 horsepower. And a lot of people said it's just a regular old Autolite spark plug with a little notch on the electrode, and that it didn't make any difference at all. And then you've got a lot of research, that Forkum did back in the day that show otherwise. And in reality, unless you're racing, you're not going to notice these differences. And I don't really think that spending $10 per spark plug back in the early to mid 90s is really worth it to the average consumer. But if you're racing and every little thing counts and you're pulling things out of your car, to reduce weight and all that, then maybe it made a difference. So SplitFire didn't, make it in the 70s, didn't even make it in the 80s. It wasn't until basically 1990 when Old World Industries acquired SplitFire and began to market it on their own. If you don't know who Old World Industries is, they own Peak. They make antifreeze and some other stuff. I found an interesting article on Old World from 1995. So the article says, what do Peak antifreeze, SplitFire spark plugs, and t-shirts have in common? They're produced under contract and sold by Old World Industries Incorporated, a privately held Northbrook, Illinois company with estimated annual revenues of close to $1 billion and 135 employees. That's crazy. I mean, all the way back then, 1995, and they were making that kind of money. So in 95, you can guess that Surefire was a big part of that billion-dollar revenue. Its president, Tom Hervis, and Pakistani-born managing director, Riaz Warike, say they have no intention of turning Old World into a public company. We thought about it, said Hervis, a former advertising agency executive, but we like things the way they are. We don't have to answer to shareholders. These two guys who were friends and started Old World Industries were named Entrepreneurs of the Year in 1994 in a competition sponsored by Ernst & Young and Merrill Lynch and Company. They promoted Peak, which Old World bought in 1986 from Enron Corporation, into the second largest selling antifreeze in the U.S. last year. Keep in mind, this is 1994. The spark plug line introduced in 1990 proved so successful that the firm moved in 1991 from its Skokie location to its current offices in Northbrook, which are 3 times larger. Old World has been shipping American cotton to Far East and Europe since 1984. Warreich, who had been in the cotton exporting business for 40 years, recently built a yarn spinning plant in his native country, Pakistan. Last month, in the equivalent of a Kerry Coles to Newcastle story, Old World completed the circle by starting to import cotton and polyester fiber yarn from Pakistan. Much of the yarn is ending up as t-shirts and golf shirts. We're selling some t-shirts as premiums in our antifreeze and spark plug business, but most of the yarn goes to other manufacturers. Wow. So these guys have done all sorts of things. So you're wondering what happened to SplitFire. That's what started me down this rabbit hole, right? So it appears that, if you watch the commercials, even the one that I put at the beginning of the video, they make claims like 5 extra horsepower by merely installing these plugs, 4.8% gain in mileage, more power and mileage or your money back. And they made all sorts of claims. They'd refer to these publications that would back up their claims, like Truckin' Magazine, Super Ford, Hot Rod, all those. But if I remember correctly, they were also advertising in these magazines, so it seems like a conflict of interest there. So in 1997, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission came down hard with accusations that the science behind the split electrode concept was faulty. So what resulted were charges of deceptive advertising and a settlement whereby SplitFire could no longer make boasts of increased fuel economy, decreased engine emissions by using the product. While this would have been the kiss of death for most brands, SplitFire was able to weather the storm for quite a few years following the debacle. But it looks like SplitFire is gone. You can still find the plugs on Amazon and eBay, and it's probably old stock that never got sold back then, but as of, I think it was 2015, they shut down their website. They're still paying for the domain name, and I think that's good for another year. And then they'll probably renew it. Who knows what they'll do with it. They no longer push the SplitFire. They focus primarily on antifreeze and diesel products. That's what happened to SplitFire. They really pushed those commercials back in the day. I remember seeing them all the time, especially if you watch TV. On the weekends when you had all the car shows on, you were always going to see at least a couple of SplitFire commercials. And I'm even guilty of falling for that and buying a set myself when I really couldn't afford it. $10 a spark plug in the 90s when I was early 20s wasn't a smart idea, but I fell for it as well. But both of these guys that I mentioned, Hervis and Warreich, they're both in their 80s now, and they're older guys, and I can't find any pictures on Mr. Warreich. There's a few on Hervis, and he's real involved in the community and gets into a lot of different things. One of the crazy things I've read, though, these guys have been connected to, I think it was 58 different corporate filings. So their names are attached to all sorts of stuff. They're not hurting, in other words. So when SplitFire went under, these guys aren't hurting. They're still out there, and Peak is doing really good, and the main corporation, the Old World Industries, they're still doing good. They're out there and living life, and it'd be interesting to be able to interview them and talk about some of the sponsorships they did back in the day. They had the NASCAR stock race, and I think it was called the SplitFire Spark Plug 500 and 200. They were also sponsoring bowlers, and they had the SplitFire Open bowling. To me, it's just interesting reading up on these guys that started this and what else they were into. Mr. Warreich, being in the cotton exporting business for 40 years, kind of bringing that back into the current company and making the t-shirts and all that sort of stuff and implementing that into Peak and SplitFire. it's interesting to me. And these guys were very successful, and I don't know how they met, if they were friends, at a young age. Who knows? That's the story on SplitFire spark plugs and where they're at today. Like I said, you can find them on eBay. You can find a lot of the advertising from the 90s and some of the drivers and teams that were endorsed by these guys. Kyle Petty, he drove a Peak sponsored car. Danica Patrick, Michael Waltrip, John Force Racing, he's in there. Let's see who else. Daniel Suarez. Crazy. So these guys probably have some stories to tell. Alright guys, well I hope y'all like this deep dive into SplitFire spark plugs. This is how my mind works. I run across something like this, tearing apart a motor, and then I start thinking, and I just can't let it go. I start digging around, and I have to figure out where it went. If this was interesting to you, please like and subscribe. Alright, you guys have a good night.